We are back for episode 5.9. Our episode begins with an extra scene of Melisandre witnessing sabotage in Stannis' camp. Ramsay's 20 good men have snuck in and burned Stannis' food, siege weapons, and horses. Now this burning horse is actually a little reference to the book, though it's in a completely different context. So in the second book, Theon buys a war horse named Smiler from an allied house in the Iron Isles called Botley. Smiler accompanies Theon back to Winterfell for his conquest, but after Theon is betrayed by Ramsay, Smiler is set aflame by the Boltons, a metaphor for Theon's smiling personality being killed that day. However, there was actually a condition for Smiler being sold to Theon in the first place. Theon would have to take on a boy named Wex as a squire. Wex is largely forgotten about after Winterfell falls, but turns up in the 5th book and is likely instrumental in saving Theon as he communicates with some northern lords and Davos about Rickon being alive. There's some complicated negotiations and trades going on, but it seems Theon's squire is very much responsible for saving Theon, and thus in a way, taking on Smiler saves Theon. We then get to Stannis very upset about this sabotage. Davos tells Stannis that they are snowed in and starving with few options left. So in the book, Stannis' group is currently stationed 3 days from Winterfell in a crofter's village. They are starving, and they are reportedly snowed in, but in actuality they can probably move. In fact, Theon's sister Asha, who is with Stannis, is a bit puzzled why they haven't moved. And so it seems Stannis is implementing a bit of a ruse. Stannis has in his ranks a disloyal bannerman, the Karstarks, and among them, they have a disloyal maester. Stannis allows this disloyal maester to send a raven to Winterfell telling Roose that Stannis is snowed in and starving, with a map on how to find them. Rather than attacking Winterfell, Stannis is allowing the fight to come to him. The prevailing theory on why Stannis is letting the battle come to him is that there's a frozen lake in the Crofters' village with fishing holes in it, and that the incoming army would fall through the holes. Next we get an extra scene of Jon returning with the wildlings from Hardhome and Alliser Thorne giving the order to allow them through the wall. The Watch glares at the wildlings, and later Jon laments to Sam that the mission was a failure. Sam reassures him that some people were saved, so it was a success of sorts. Now in the book, all of this happens a bit differently. Sam, of course, is off in Oldtown, and Alliser Thorne was sent ranging north of the Wall. Additionally, the mission to Hardhome isn't what brings the wildlings to the Wall, but peace with Tormund. Jon sends the captured wildling Val to bring back Tormund and about 4,000 of his followers to cross through. It's first steward Bowen Marsh who has a problem with this, mainly because the Watch doesn't have enough food. Now one big issue in the book that has been dropped from the show is how to maintain wildling loyalty once they cross through the Wall. People assume that the wildlings will just start raiding and betray Jon, and so Jon does have a mechanism to keep the wildlings loyal. Jon takes 100 child hostages of wildling leaders. Our author makes quite a big deal about these hostages, talking about them for a couple pages, and even parallels them with child hostages taken by Dany over in Slaver's Bay. Of course, the complexities and flaws of hostage-taking is a reoccurring theme in our story, Theon being a prime example of the practice's flaws, and it's of some note that Dany in the book doesn't have it in her to harm small children, making her hostage-taking useless. Jon similarly doesn't implement the practice well. He takes thin, weak boys who are probably of little use to wildling families, and he takes many children of dead leaders, who wouldn't motivate anyone to stay loyal. Tormund even tries to trick Jon by passing off a couple girls for boys, though at least those 2 girls are caught. We then get an extra scene of Stannis sending Davos back to Castle Black to request more supplies from the Night's Watch, but it's really to get rid of Davos. Davos wants Selyse and Shireen to come with him, but Stannis refuses. Of course, in the book, Melisandre, Shireen, and Selyse are not with Stannis, but at Castle Black, and Davos is off on Skagos, searching for Rickon. Next we get an extra scene where Davos goes to say goodbye to Shireen. Shireen is reading The Dance of the Dragons, a true telling by Maester Munkin, and she tells the story of Sir Byron's swan and his failed attempt to polish his shield and approach the dragon Vhagar during the dance. Now this story is a bit of a throwaway line here in the show, but there's actually quite a bit to it. First off, Sir Byron is attempting to mimic a technique used by Serwyn of the Mirror Shield against the dragon Urax in ancient times. The legend seems to indicate that dragons, with Eastern-sounding names no less, lived in Westeros in ancient times, that is, long before Aegon's Landing. The second interesting thing about the story is Sir Byron Swan's loyalty. In the 5th book, Tyrion, in an intellectual debate, actually questions which dragons Sir Byron approached, believing it not to be Vhagar, that is, Aemond Targaryen's dragon of the Green faction, but instead Syrax, that is, Rhaenyra Targaryen's dragon of the Black faction. Since Storm's End fought for the Greens and the Swans are sworn to Storm's End, Tyrion's idea is that Sir Byron should be attacking a black faction dragon. Additionally, this is what Sir Byron's squire claimed. Now, this scene is meant to show us how smart and well-read Tyrion is. That is, he's so smart he can figure out when a Grand Maester has erred. However, there is actually good reason to think that Tyrion is completely wrong, and the scene is actually meant to show Tyrion's intellectual arrogance. You see, during the Dance of the Dragons, the Stormlanders had no opportunity to battle Rhaenyra and Syrax of the Black Faction. They only made it to King's Landing during the Moon of the Three Kings, which is after Rhaenyra's retreat and the death of Syrax. On the other hand, Aemond and Vhagar did visit Storm's End to try to convince the Baratheons to join the Greens, so there was more opportunity to attack Vhagar. And then there's the issue of the Swans. House Swan was in a particularly interesting situation, as a Joanna Swan was kidnapped and her ransom was never paid by the Lord of Stonehelm. I suspect there was a succession issue on why she wasn't retrieved. Johanna eventually rose to rule the city of Lys, and Lys ended up siding with the Greens. So it's possible that Sir Byron was attacking Vhagar for political reasons related to House Swan. And so the point of all of this is, history is messy. Anyway, the extra scene ends with Davos giving Shireen a wooden stag. We then head down to Dorne for an extra scene with Jaime coming clean with Dorne and saying that there was a threat against Myrcella, and that's why he came to Dorne. Dorne agrees to return Myrcella to King's Landing, with Trystane coming with her to take a place on the small council. The crew toasts to King Tommen, and Ellaria intentionally spills her wine instead. Bronn is then retrieved and receives a punch in the face as restitution for hurting Trystane. Now in the book, a Kingsguard named Sir Balon Swan is sent to Dorne under the guise of delivering the Mountain's Head, but his true mission is to return with Myrcella, claiming King Tommen misses her. The impetus of this trip is simply Cersei coming into power after the death of Tywin and wanting her daughter back. Cersei knows nothing of Arianna Martell's kidnapping plan. Now Balon is delayed several weeks by Doran's bannermen, hosting feasts and games for him, but he does eventually make it to Sunspear, where they hold a banquet for him. Like here in the show, Balon does agree to send Myrcella back to King's Landing with Trystane, but it's Lady Nym who will fill the space on the small council. And then Doran claims that a knight called Darkstar, one of Arianna Martell's conspirators, slashed off Myrcella's ear and returned home. Rather than returning home with Myrcella, Sir Balon heads off to bring justice to Darkstar. Darkstar, by the way, is likely innocent. Now at this banquet, there is a toast to King Tommen, but half the guests do not drink, and it's Obara who spills her wine in defiance. Now the biggest difference between Book Doran and Show Doran is that in the show, Doran really does want peace with the Lannisters, while in the book, he's hiding some sort of plan against them. He claims to Arianna that his plan is to team up with Daenerys, but there are some, including me, that believe Doran has a larger, more complicated plan. Regardless, what's interesting about the toast in the book is that the characters who had more inside knowledge of Doran's plan, like his daughter Arianna, drank, while the others didn't or spilled. The drinkers were feigning support to keep Doran's intentions hidden, while the non-drinkers didn't seem to be trusted with inside knowledge. We next go to Braavos with Arya, where she is on her way to the Thin Man to supposedly kill him. Her mission is interrupted, though, because at the docks she sees the arrival of Mace Tyrell and Sir Meryn Trant. Trant, of course, is on Arya's death list for killing Syrio. Mace is here in Braavos to negotiate an extension on the Crown's loans with the Iron Bank. Arya later follows Meryn to a brothel where Meryn is trying to find very young girls to have sex with. A man named Brusco tries to throw Arya out of the brothel, but a sex worker named Brea wants to buy oysters from her. Now Arya's scenes here have quite a few elements from the book, but they're jumbled up, and we have a conflation of quite a few identities of Arya. So where to start? Arya's first identity in Braavos is Cat of the Canals, named for her mother. As Cat, she lives with a fish seller named Brusco, a servant of the House of Black and White, as well as his daughter Brea. So this bouncer and sex worker seem to be named for them despite being completely different characters. Arya's third identity is the ugly little girl who is sent to murder an insurance salesman, and like here in the show, Arya is a little reluctant to murder him until the House of Black and White tells her that he cheats his clients. Arya, in the end, does slip a poison coin in with the insurance seller's money, figuring that he would eventually bite the coin, though we don't actually know his fate. Arya's fourth identity is a young actress named Mercy, likely named for her time with the Hound. As this actress, we aren't really sure of her real mission or purpose, but it's then she runs into not Sir Meryn Trant, but one of the Mountain's men named Raff the Sweetling, who's working as a guard for a man named Harry Swift, the Master of Coin, who has come to Braavos for a loan extension from the Iron Bank. Arya, who is only 11 in the book, then propositions Raff the Sweetling for sex in order to get him a loan so she can kill him. So again, many elements from the book, but jumbled up. We then get an extra scene where Ellaria is brought before Doran, where she is given a choice between death or submission to him. She agrees to submit to Doran's way, while the Sand Snakes look on in disgust. Ellaria then goes to visit Jaime, where she tells Jaime that she knows of his incest but doesn't care. She also assures Jaime that she believes that he and Myrcella are innocent in the death of Oberyn. Now in the book, after the feast for Balon's Swan, there is a submission scene for the Sand Snakes to Doran's will, though Ellaria plays a very different role. So after the feast, the Sand Snakes look upon the skull of the mountain that Sir Balon has delivered and believe it insufficient. They want revenge against the other 6 kingdoms. However, Ellaria protests, saying that she's seen enough war, and says this is all an endless cycle of violence. Ellaria is then dismissed by Doran. Doran then proceeds to tell the Sand Snakes that Sir Balon and Cersei plan to lead Trystane into a trap on their way back to King's Landing, and Trystane would be murdered. We, by the way, have no evidence of this from Cersei's point of view, and Doran is likely lying about it. The Sand Snakes are aghast at this supposed plan to kill Trystane, and Doran demands their loyalty, and they give it to him. Doran then orders Obara to accompany Sir Balon in his hunt for Darkstar. Lady Nym will go to King's Landing and sit on the Small Council. Tyene will infiltrate the Faith of the Seven and get close to the High Sparrow. We then get an extra scene where Stannis comes to talk to Shireen one last time. She's still reading the Dance of the Dragons and says that the choosing of sides is what destroyed the Targaryens. Stannis then says that sometimes there is no choice, and one has to do what destiny intends for them. Shireen wants to help, and Stannis brings her out to where everyone has gathered for her sacrifice. At first, Selyse condones the sacrifice, but then changes her mind and wants to save her daughter. It's too late, and Shireen is burned alive. Now in the book, Shireen, Selyse, and Melisandre are at Castle Black alive and well. If there's going to be a sacrifice of Shireen, we don't have any sign of it coming anytime soon. That said, the Game of Thrones showrunners claim that our author plans on burning Shireen, and child sacrifice is a running theme of the story. Not to mention, George R.R. Martin does have a story called And 7 Times Never Kill Man, where a leader of an expansionist religion called the Steel Angels receives visions that convince him to sacrifice the settlement's children. So while Shireen's sacrifice hasn't happened yet in the book, there's a good chance it will. Stannis, though, is rather far away from Shireen geographically and is dealing with his own issues of sacrifice. As I said earlier, Stannis is currently camped out in the snow 3 days from Winterfell, starving. On this march to Winterfell, some of Stannis' men, the ardent followers of R'hllor, requested a sacrifice to their god to stop the storms, and Theon's sister Asha feared the sacrifice would be her. Stannis, though, denies the request. The sacrifice talk continues, though, with even the Northmen joining in, wanting a sacrifice to their gods. After some men are caught eating a dead body, though, Stannis makes a bit of a compromise. He allows the execution of these men for the crime of cannibalism to be turned into a burning. This is much like how Stannis turned the execution of Mance Rayder into a burning. Next we have Daenerys attending the opening of the fighting pits. Now, this is a rather famous scene from the book, although it is considerably different. So here in the show, Dany comes to the fighting pits and is attended by Hizdahr, Tyrion, Daario, and Missandei. In the books, the only companion who is the same is Hizdahr. Dany is accompanied instead by Barristan, who's still alive, Irian Jiqui, still alive, as well as the show-only character of Strong Belwas, and Doran Martell's son Quentyn and his companions. Tyrion in the book appears only briefly as a jousting dwarf, and Grey Worm and Missandei are off somewhere. They are not mentioned in the chapter. Daario is being used as a political hostage given to Yunkai when the pit scene occurs. So here in the show, the crew debates which type of fighters win fights, as well as the importance of fighting pits in the culture of Meereen. Jorah then arrives, fights, and defeats all of his opponents. He spots that Dany's in trouble, and then kills a member of the Sons of the Harpy. Soon a mass of the Sons of the Harpy reveal themselves, and a slaughter occurs. Hizdahr is then slain, Dany runs to the center of the pit in danger, and then Drogon arrives and starts burning people. Dany removes a spear from Drogon's neck, gets a scream in the face, and then mounts Drogon and takes off. And Meereen is left in the hands of Tyrion. So in the book, this all happens very differently. So the opening of the fighting pits actually happens the day after Dany and Hizdahr's wedding and the couple's consummation. On the way to the pits, Dany starts having her doubts about whether she is truly helping the city, noting a turned-over palanquin that's blocking their way. Hizdahr tries to assure her that yes, ending slavery did improve people's lives and the future will be brighter. However, once at the pit and seeing the cruelty, Dany's doubts return and she essentially has a panic attack. Now notably, while at the pits, Hizdahr also offers Dany a bowl of honeyed locusts. Dany's companion, Strong Belwas, loves locusts and eats them and drinks some wine, and ends up poisoned, though he does survive. And so at the pits, we have this big mirror to Joffrey's wedding where there was this mystery of who poisoned the wine, or perhaps it was the pie, and who was the target. Maybe it was Joffrey or Tyrion, and who was the culprit, Olenna or Littlefinger or someone else. And so fans still heavily debate what exactly happened at the fighting pits. Barristan believes Hizdahr wanted to poison Dany as he's the one that provided the honey locusts, although Dany's advisor Skahaz had control over the escort and perhaps wanted to poison Hizdahr. But then again, Dany's palanquin stopped in front of the Pyramid of Paul, and the House of Paul has reason to want revenge against Strong Belwas for killing a member of their house when taking Meereen. So there's quite a few possibilities on the culprit and target. In the pit, Tyrion does briefly appear as a jouster who's going to be secretly mauled by lions, which would be ironic considering his sigil, but Dany mercifully calls off the slaughter, never knowing who the dwarf was. All of the action becomes chaotic when a female pit fighter gets mauled by a boar. Dany becomes massively uncomfortable with the violence, while Strong Belwas starts vomiting from the locusts and wine. And then Drogon arrives without the cause really being known. In the show it's to rescue Dany, but in the books it's rather ambiguous. Did the noise bring him? The smell of pork? Did Dany's uncomfortable feeling call him? It's unknown. Drogon's arrival then causes the crowd to panic, and many people are trampled. There's no attack from the Sons of the Harpy at the fighting pit or anything like that. A random spearman does try to take Drogon down, but is killed. Dany receives a scream in the face with furnace winds and then removes the spear. She then mounts Drogon and takes off. And the city is not left in the hands of Tyrion, but Hizdahr. Hizdahr survives the fighting pits, and our perspective in Meereen switches to Barristan. And that's all for episode 5.9. See you in episode 5.10.